Joan Didion, the great American essayist, novelist, screenwriter, literary hot mama, had a really famous quote. She said this: "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." So, with all due respect to Harrison Ford's former boss, I think she gets it exactly wrong. The stories we tell ourselves often prevent us from truly living. This is a pretty basic principle in Zen Buddhism. We cling to our stories about life. We cling to our ideas about life. Ideas are just the building blocks for our stories, and we cling to all these things instead of tasting, feeling, hearing, smelling, sensing, touching, making relationship with the world around us. So the basic principles in Zen of Engi, or dependent origination, if you then me, and no self, ain't nothing in here to protect or hide. These are tools that Buddhism gives us to deconstruct our stupid little personal stories. I'm going to touch on all that just a little bit later on, but first, I'd like to share a personal stupid little story. Which brings us back to my parents' divorce after 53 years of marriage, which happened last year. If there is ever a group of people that we tell ourselves stories about, it is our primogenitors, the people who raised us, the people who fed us their breast milk, their ideas, mom and dad. Now I have a big family. I've got one older sister and two younger brothers and two younger sisters. We recently got into this big, epic text chain where we were sharing our feelings and emotions and telling each other stories about our youth and basically trying to process the new shape of our family, which is Dad on one side of town with his new friend, who's female, my mom on the other side of town. So in this text chain with my siblings about my dad, there's an interesting process going on. So there's confusion, there's curiosity, there's joy, there's sadness, there's anger, there's resentment, there's hope. There's a lot going on. And our little minds funnel all of this formless energy into narratives about my father. So this past weekend, two of my siblings got to meet my dad's new friend. And then on Sunday, after the dinner, all of my siblings got together and had a Zoom call about it. And this is when things got really deep for me. So I went into this Zoom call with my siblings cool as a cucumber. I had all my theories and stories and ideas about my parents polished to shining, lined up, and ready to share. And then, of course, my freaking Zoom connection gives out. So I have to dial back into the conversation. And this takes a while. And by then, several of my siblings are already sharing their stories. So my video is still off. My mic is muted. And I don't unmute the mic or turn on my video. I just pause and I watch my siblings' faces and I hear them tell their stories. And as I do this, my own heart and my story begin to shift and move in new and interesting ways. You see, I had gone into this little Rashomon-like Zoom call with stories about my parents. And the general drift of those stories was they are a certain way. They have certain characteristics that were the ingredients for certain problems and suffering in our family. And the conclusion of my story was, why can't they see this? Why can't they see the story as I see it and change those characteristics and be a different way? But as my siblings talked and I listened, I really began to realize that my story about my parents was not about my parents. It was about me. There were ways that I had contributed to suffering in our family that I couldn't face or change. I was the oldest brother, and I was a bit of a dick, or more. And as I saw the faces of my siblings, I could see my little sisters like on the screen, and it just came back to me when they were little kids, like their tiny, cute little faces. And I remembered how I had completely withdrawn from our family. I was an island. And if anyone tried to swim toward that island, I got out my cannon and I started taking shots. I mean, I was a bastard. I really was. I was a mean older brother. So a good story is a story that you listen to. And it's a story that runs deep. And it's a story that goes down to the bottom of a well. And you go down to the bottom of that well too. And you think there's answers down in the bottom of that well, but in fact there's water. And when you come down to the bottom of that well, you see your reflection staring back at you, but you see yourself in a new way. One of the things that came out for me in this conversation with my siblings is that I have an inability to really confront people about what is bothering me, because that will make me vulnerable. And I'm perhaps so scared of being vulnerable, and I'm so angry that I have to be open and vulnerable that I would rather sit back and hold my angry story and judge them and nurture this dark plant of resentment than open the doors, let the sunlight in, and bring the problem out in front of me. Oftentimes, our bad stories develop because we're afraid to share the truth about what we're feeling, thinking, experiencing, and going through with the people that we love and care about the most. But if we don't do that, then we don't get the opportunity to let people speak their truth and their stories and allow those stories into us and process them and have their truth and their perspective reshape us inside and reform us and help us come to deeper insights about our relationships and about ourselves. Quite simply, my Zen teacher used to call this making relationship, giving and receiving. Let's face it, we all have wounds, and these wounds hinder us from openly giving and receiving. We don't speak honestly, and we don't truly listen because we're afraid we're going to get hurt again. We sit on our islands of isolation, like I did when I was a little kid, and we tell ourselves stories. Making relationship is about scrapping these stories and letting the raw-ass data of life in. I get it. It's so hard to be open. It's so hard to share honestly. It's so hard to truly listen. It's so hard to tell yourself that you don't truly know someone, but you don't. You create that person to yourself through your relationship with them. And that's why relationships are so precious. They're these living, vital, in the moment things. They're like children that exist between two people. And you're continually creating that living, dynamic, vital thing in the moment, right here and right now, moment after moment. And that relationship is always up for grabs. It's never truly set in stone. This is the practice of anatta, or no self in Buddhism, and engi, or dependent origination, in real time, in real life. If we're in the moment and we're clinging to a story, then that relationship, that living thing dies. And you know what happens then? You inhabit a dead body and you put the other person in a dead body. You're like a zombie. You know what we call that? It's a role. You're inhabiting a role. You become the angry son, or the distant father, or the mother who has to please everybody. This is like the definition of inauthentic living. Better to take a chance to expose yourself and see what your relationship truly reflects back to you. If you're telling yourself a story in order to live, then the story you're telling yourself is a cliche. It's a script, and you're in a role, and you're reading lines. When my older sister and I were kids, every once in a while my dad would bring home like this great, amazing box of like powdered donuts. And this was a total treat for us because like we were a sugar-free household, right? But here was the problem. My sister and I could only eat one donut after every meal. But my dad would put this box of donuts in front of him and he would eat like 5 or 6 of these things. So my older sister and I, we thought this was incredibly unfair. So we would hold these very serious private meetings between the two of us where we would take notes and take minutes on these meetings and discuss the problem thoroughly. And I remember one meeting, I'll never forget this, when I like got really into it with my sister. Like I really got into it with her. And I was like, you know, Dad, he seems so generous and he seems so good. He goes out into the world and he comes back to us with this box of treats, right? And he just seems like such a good, generous man. And then he eats all these donuts. And I remember telling her, I really got into it. I was like, I don't know this man. I don't know this man. And here I am, decades later, having private meetings with my siblings and essentially coming to the same conclusion. My father, my parents, are a mystery. And so, I'm like a kid again. I can close down, shut myself off, lock myself into my room, and play with my little stories. Or I can open the door and peek my head outside and take a few steps out, get in front of my dad, my parents, my family, and see what happens next. Don't know if that makes any sense. I've said enough. I am done speaking. Speaking of stories, I'm working on one, a novel-length story about, it's like a bit sci-fi, it's a bit satire, it's a bit cyberpunk, it's a bit biopunk. It tries to weave together different Zen ideas with perspectives on technology and evolution and where our planet seems to be going, our cultures and our societies. I hope it's a good story. I hope it's true. I hope it holds up the mirror to you and me. A lot of people are supporting me on Patreon now. I'm going to put the link below here. It's also going to be in the description. If you want to keep supporting these videos and help me write my novel as I live out my life here in Austria, I really appreciate it. And if you can, let's game the algorithms by hitting subscribe and like, and that helps these videos reach more people. Thank you so much, and good luck with your day.